Good afternoon, Summa scholars. Welcome back to the Beaver Galleon. What was the question we were on? Whether God is omnipotent. We're going to finish that up with objection 4, reply to objection 4, and then move into article 4, which is whether God can make the past not to have been. Oh, that should be a fun question, guys. I'm heading out tonight to go out with someone. And I have to do Vespers still. So as always, it seems we're going to zip through this. But again, the point is not to have deep analytical discussions over each point of law here, but the point is to let the flow of Thomas's argument roll over us in the beauty of catechesis and camaraderie. And let's just roll with it now. Reply to objection 4. Objection 4 was, God hath made foolish the wisdom of the world, whence it would seem that nothing is to be judged possible or impossible in reference to inferior causes, as the wisdom of the world judges them, but in reference to the divine power. If then God were omnipotent, all things would be possible. Nothing, therefore, is impossible. Oh yeah, that whole thing. Let's see what Thomas's reply is. We'll go ahead and start it where we back up a little bit. Reply to objection 4. The absolute possible is not so called in reference either to higher causes or to inferior causes, but in reference to itself. Meaning we're talking about, seems to me, the divine perspective and not human perspective. But the possible in reference to some power is named possible in reference to its proximate cause. Hence, those things which it belongs to God alone to do immediately, for example, to create, to justify, and the like, are said to be possible in reference to a higher cause. Those things, however, which are of such kind as to be done by inferior causes are said to be possible in reference to those inferior causes. For it is according to the condition of the proximate cause that the effect has contingency or necessity, as was shown above in question 14, article 1 and 2. Thus, it is that the wisdom of the world is deemed foolish, because what is impossible to nature, it judges to be impossible to God. So it is clear that the omnipotence of God does not take away from things their impossibility and necessity. Again, we're toggling forth between divine and human perspective. This is a perfect example of why are we listening to this, because it seems kind of obvious. But again, a flower seems obvious. A tadpole seems obvious. I mean, we're here to ponder the things of God and let them just roll over us. And as I said, the hope is that eventually, once we clear and clarify our mind enough and have our mind filled with these things and not distractions, then we can possibly come to some kind of experience as Mr. Aquinas did. In the end, when we see that it's all straw and we're elevated to union. May it be so for all of us, friends. Starting article 4, whether God can make the past not to have been. Objection 1. Larry steps up to the plate. It seems that God can make the past not to have been. For what is impossible in itself is much more impossible than that which is only impossible accidentally. But God can do what is impossible in itself, as to give sight to the blind and raise the dead. Therefore, and much more, can he do what is only impossible accidentally. Now, for the past not to have been is impossible accidentally. Thus, for Socrates not to be running is accidentally impossible from the fact that his running is a thing of the past. Therefore, God can make the past not to have been. All right, it's going to be interesting to see what Thomas has to say about this. Once Socrates already has run, he has run. Let's see if Thomas brings it back to the thing that I was saying yesterday about God cannot lie. That which is actually is. We'll see how Thomas deals with it. Objection 2, Ralph. Further, what God could do, he can do now, since his power is not lessened. But God could have effected, before Socrates ran, that he should not run. Therefore, when he has run, God could effect that he did not run. These are all kind of variations on a theme, it seems to me. Let's just move on to objection 3. I have to be on this not date at 6 p.m. Further, charity is a more excellent virtue than virginity, but God can supply charity that is lost. Therefore, also lost virginity. Therefore, he can so effect that what was corrupt should not have been corrupt. Interesting. This beaver's wanting to just go down and have a full-on conversation about virginity and whatnot. Let's see what Thomas has to say about that. On the contrary, here's the argument from authority. Jerome says, although God can do all things, he cannot make a thing that is corrupt not to have been corrupted. Therefore, for the same reason, he cannot affect that anything else which is past should not have been. That's the argument from authority. Let's hear Thomas's logical explanation in the Respondio. I answer that, as we said above in question 7 of Article 2, there does not fall under the scope of God's omnipotence anything that implies a contradiction. Again, that's the lying thing. God is complete truth. He sees all things. What is, is. Now that the past should not have been implies a contradiction. For, as it implies a contradiction to say that Socrates is sitting and is not sitting at the same time, so does it say that he sat and did not sit. But to say that he did sit is to say that it happened in the past. To say that he did not sit is to say that it did not happen. Whence, that the past should not have been does not come under the scope of divine power. This is what Augustine means when he says, whosoever says, if God is almighty, let him make what is done as if it were not done, does not see that this is to say, if God is almighty, let him affect that which is true by the very fact that it is true, make it be false or be false. Again, that's the same thing I was saying. God does not lie, cannot lie, that he is all truth and light. And the reason for that was explained earlier on in the book, but it is that God is full being. He does not have anything in him that is potency, nor does he have anything that is void. Reply to objection 1. Although it is impossible accidentally for the past not to have been, if one considers the past thing itself, for instance, the running of Socrates, nevertheless, if the past thing is considered as past, that it should not have been is impossible, not only in itself, but absolutely, since it implies a contradiction. Thus it is more impossible than the raising of the dead, in which there is nothing contradictory, because this is reckoned impossible in reference to some power, that is to say, some natural power, not God's power. For such impossible things do come beneath the scope of divine power. So we're having two different uses of the word power. One being, when we're saying power, we're saying the ability to do something, but it's in two different realms. In the natural realm, when we use the word impossible, we mean impossible from the human perspective, but that does not mean that it is ontologically, irrevocably impossible. It's just impossible in the natural level, not to the divine level. But to contradict, to lie, is impossible for the deity, and therefore God does not change the past or make the past that has been to have not been, because it is. Reply to objection 2. As God, in accordance with the perfection of the divine power, can do all things, and yet some things are not subject to his power because they fall short of being possible. So also, if we regard the immutability of the divine power, whatever God could do, he can do now. Some things, however, at one time were in the nature of possibility, whilst they were yet to be done, which now fall short of the nature of possibility when they have been done. So is God said not to be able to do them, because they themselves cannot be done. Again, that's the can God win a chess game with only if he only has the king? According to the laws of chess, it is an impossibility. And that is no contradiction to God's power, because God himself has set down the laws of mathematics, space, time, realizing, of course, that the chessboard is a manifestation of space-time. It has space and time. You don't have enough time for your knight to get over and defend the queen, which also is not enough space. There's too much space, which means not enough time. Space-time. All right. Reply to objection 3. God can remove all corruption of the mind and body from a woman who has fallen, but the fact that she has been corrupt cannot be removed from her, as also it is impossible that the fact of having sinned or having lost charity thereby can be removed from the sinner. This gets into some beautiful teaching on tshuva and repentance and the nature of repentance. And it can be, I'll just say this without any kind of backup or anything, but it can be, this is said in Kabbalah, but it's also affirmed by the Philokalia, the Desert Fathers, and I think also Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, the Carmelites. This is that if there's some corruption or some sin or some break with the divine life, it can be that that thing that caused the break can bring a person to an even higher level, because they could come to a point of such, and this happens through prayer, fasting, keeping your mind in the things of holiness, not through scrolling Facebook or whatever. It comes through like the Desert Fathers going out to pray. There comes a point where it's called the Way of Tears. The monks called it the Way of Tears. That is, that you see clearly what you've done. It's no longer you just trying to not sin, but you actually see how it breaks the divine life, how it breaks your life, and then your heart breaks and begins to gently and delightfully weep, and those tears soften the heart, and the heart becomes more open. It's the crack that lets the light in. It's a cold and a broken Alleluia, as the song Alleluia, Leonard Cohen says. And so you actually end up at a higher level. And that's why St. Paul said, should we sin that grace should abound? God forbid. But once someone's in that case, God can take them to an even higher level if they go through the way of tears and have deep compunction, and their heart is purified through the way of tears. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but this is just, you guessed it, the daily Summa. We're only doing one page a day. All right, here we go. Article 5. We're moving on to a whole new question, a new sugya, you might say. Whether God can do what he does not. Whether God can do what he does not. Let's see what Larry thinks. Larry, objection 1. It seems that God cannot do other than what he does. For God cannot do what he has not foreknown and preordained that he would do. But he neither foreknew nor preordained that he would do anything except what he has done. Therefore, he cannot do except what he has done, what he does. Now, this is going to be interesting. And it's going to talk about the deep inner essence of God. And there's also probably a lot of interesting stuff you could say about different worlds or different timelines. People love to talk about that stuff nowadays. But let's see what Thomas does. And we're going to do it tomorrow. We're going to have to do it tomorrow, folks. I'm so sorry. But it's a cliffhanger. Aren't you so excited? Aren't you so excited? Objection 2. Further, God can only do what ought to be done and what is right to be done. But God is not bound to do what he does not, nor is it right that he should do what he does not. Therefore, he cannot do except what he does. The word should there is a moral qualification. Thomas is probably going to say, we're not talking about the moral realm. We're talking about the realms of possibility of what God could create, different worlds, things like that. Objection 3. Further, God cannot do anything that is not good and befitting creation. Good start. Remember, these are the objections. This is not what Thomas teaches. Thomas is going to come against what they're asking at the beginning. We have a little battle here, sort of like in Gomorrah, but not quite so extensive. Further, God cannot do anything that is not good and befitting creation, but it is not good for creatures, nor befitting them to be otherwise than as they are. Therefore, God cannot do except what he does. All right, tomorrow we dive straight into the sweet on the contrary, and then the respondio. Folks, I hope you have a wonderful evening. Good evening. And man, that I leave